Let's get to our lead debate this evening on the India Development Debate. We're talking about what's happening in neighboring Sri Lanka, where the economic crisis is, of course, turning into a political crisis for the Rajapaksa government. So as the protests mount, the entire government just resigned. All 26 members of cabinet resigned. New ministers have been appointed. In fact, the president's brother was also sacked, and a new finance minister was also brought in. Trading was halted on the Sri Lankan stock exchange after it plunged nearly 6%. Meanwhile, public anger is boiling over and spilling onto the streets. Just hours after curfew was lifted in the capital city of Colombo, protesters took to the streets once again, demanding the resignation of the Rajapaksa brothers from the post of president and prime minister. Now, my colleague Priyank Tripathi is in Colombo right now and filed this report from earlier in the day.
We are at this Alexander Square and all these students have come out on the streets of Colombo protesting against the siblings of Rajapaksa, saying that go home Gotabaya. Gotabaya, who also had a dual citizenship, had come from the US and he was made the prime minister after he surrendered his citizenship, and that is a tagline which has been taken by all these students. The family governance, nepotism, hands off our future. You have ruined most of it already. He should resign. These are the placard which has been holded by all these students. Go home, Gotabaya. Gotabaya, go back. That is quite visibly seen, and all these lines which is being written on all these plates are Rajapaksa, enough is enough. What is the message to the Rajapaksa brothers, the sibling brothers, because they have not resigned, the cabinet has resigned?
Gota and Mahinda should resign. We don't want Mahinda or Gota. We want all Rajapaksa to go. We want our country back. We want the country for the children. We have children. We have no problem, but we have this Rajapaksa problem. So ask them to go.
Okay, so what exactly is happening in Sri Lanka? How did the situation deteriorate so rapidly in the last 3 years? Was it only what is visible to the surface? Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic ensured that a nation which depends a lot on tourism revenue didn't just have that, because no one was traveling in the world. And then the Ukraine-Russia crisis has worsened supply chain issues and the cost of things like fuel. But is it just that? Dr. Ahilan Kadirgamar, senior lecturer at the University of Jaffna, joins us on the show. Great to have you back, sir. Siddhartha Sanyal, chief economist and head research, Bandhan Bank, is with us today. And I'm also speaking with Mandana Ismail, editor of the Sunday morning newspaper. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us. Mandana, let me come to you first and just get a sense from you on the ground of how dire the situation is. I mean, obviously the government now, all the ministers got sacked. They tried to bring in the opposition leaders who didn't want any of it. Is there any visible move to ease the pain of the people? Are people at least seeing those efforts being made?
Well, no, actually not at the moment, because whatever steps that have been taken so far, the cabinet ministers resigning, has failed to kind of give any form of confidence to the public, because actually you see more and more people on the streets today, and especially the youth. There was a lot of youth, and especially in the Independence Square, it was dominated by youth, and even women and people who would never have stepped on the streets. So it's basically the situation has gone from bad to worse from last week to now, and the cabinet resigning has not given any form of confidence to the people, because the problems remain the same. And the government, the president has appointed 4 new cabinet ministers temporarily, but they're from the same old cabinet. So basically it's a change of faces. Right now, we don't need a change of faces. We need a systematic change, change in the structure. There has to be some form of management coming in, a proper plan to address the economic issue. Of course, it has been happening for a while, since 2019, the Easter Sunday attacks, and then the pandemic. But then it cannot be blamed. The government has turned to the pandemic for a lot of reasons. But if you look at the countries in the region, how they have fared, I mean, it goes to show that pandemic alone, it was not the cause of this crisis. And you see continuing power cuts, fuel shortages in medicine, and every aspect. So the common man's life, everyone has been affected, and the situation continues to get bad. And by now, there are thousands on the streets of Colombo and all parts of the country. Every city in the country has protests, and we see ministers' houses getting surrounded. People are surrounding houses in the ministers, in their houses, in their constituencies, their houses in Colombo. So the situation is continuing until the government comes up with some form of solid plan to address it, a feasible plan, a tangible plan to address it. There won't be confidence among the people.
So, we will come to what the solutions could be in just a bit from now. And I read a report which said that exams were cancelled because there was no printing paper to import. So it's truly dire. Dr. Ahilan, I want to go back to a bit on the context of what has happened. And we had a chance of speaking before on this briefly, but I think we need to go into a little more detail. Is this a policy of liberalization along with welfare that has placed the Sri Lankan economy in an exceptionally vulnerable situation? Yes, there are contextual reasons. You import a lot of what you need, dependence on tourism, etc., and COVID-19 was unforeseen. But in terms of policy, if I were to ask you which were the policies that wrecked the economy, what would you say?
Yeah, Sri Lanka was the first country in South Asia to liberalize its economy back in 1977. But they couldn't go full steam because of the civil war, which engulfed us for almost 25 years. And in fact, our GDP probably would be twice as large if it wasn't for the civil war and the slowing down of growth. But nevertheless, it was at the end of the war that it led to a much higher or accelerated form of liberalization in trade, in finance, all of that leading to a lot of flow of capital, but without much productive investment. That's been a huge problem for the economy. The debt stock has been increasing. Consistently, we've been borrowing and rolling over debt and investing some of that in real estate, investing that in the beautification of Colombo, investing that in hotels for tourism. And when Mahinda Rajapaksa took over his second term soon after the war, the entire vision was to try to rebuild the Sri Lankan economy with tourism. So there was a lot of coastal land grabs, and all that investment has not provided the returns. On the other hand, our debt stock has been increasing. Of course, when capital comes in and we invest in real estate, we show high levels of growth. So if you look at 2010, 11, 12, Sri Lanka had very high rates of GDP growth on the order of 8%. But then that bubble bursts, it starts to tank down. And every time that happens, what the Rajapaksas did was to fuel anti-minority sentiment. They started attacking the Muslims. So this kind of way in which they were managing the situation. But with the pandemic, it sort of put a full stop to it because tourism completely came under the lockdown. Foreign remittances started to decline. So suddenly we could not even roll over our debt. But in a sense, this kind of a situation was building up for decades, and certainly the last.
Dr. Ahilan, I want to get an understanding on whether this was an inevitability or have the Sri Lankan people today identified glaring and obvious lapses in how the economy was steered and how the situation was handled when COVID-19 hit. The world was reeling from it. And as Mandana said earlier, some recovered less bruised and battered and some more so. Is that where the political anger is today coming from?
Sri Lanka was already headed into a crisis even before this government came to power. In 2016, we had to go into an IMF agreement because we were having similar balance of payment problems. We've always rolled over the debt. But by March 2020, exactly 2 years ago, it was amply clear that we were going to head into this kind of a crisis. But that was not taken into consideration by the government. They were only interested in consolidating power. And so they passed the 20th Amendment to the Constitution, keeping huge amount of powers on the president. They did very little to give relief to the people. So the anger that the people are now coming out with is for what they did over the last 2 years, and particularly the last few months. How can you run a country where last year we had the peak amount of imports, and then suddenly the next couple months we can't even afford petrol, we can't afford paper, we can't afford milk powder. So this anger is finally coming out because people are so disappointed with the way in which this particular family has been consolidating power with a certain kind of arrogance to the detriment of people's conditions.
Yes. Let me go across to Mr. Sanyal. Mr. Sanyal, I hope your audio is fixed. I wanted to get a broader perspective on what are the policies that could have led to this situation. And we hear very broadly, it was a lot of welfareism. There's a wire agency report that says there was a high-level meeting in government where there was a warning that the kind of subsidies and freebies our state governments have all promised during elections and now will have to deliver them could lead to a Sri Lanka kind of crisis. Can you explain this context?
Well, right now, all of a sudden in the last few months, if not last few weeks, it has grabbed headline for the international observers, like someone like me, who is not directly associated with Sri Lanka, perhaps, but as a neighboring country, we must be tracking it. But at the same time, what was very interesting, if you see the way the economy has moved over the course of the last several years, I would say, and my counterparts and friends from Sri Lanka on this particular show would know better. But what, as a somewhat distant observer also, we could find that, for example, country ratings had been moving downwards not for the last 2 years, not during the COVID period, but even before that, it was consistently moving lower. There was a bit of pressure on currency off and on there. And in a country like this, a small country, which ends up doing a lot of imports on commodities, if there is an uncertainty about the regime and if there is an uncertainty about the prospect of currency, the hit it immediately becomes some kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, and that is possibly had been happening in case of Sri Lanka over and above all the real structural issues they do have. So solutions may actually be pretty complex going ahead. At this moment, for sure, had they been attempted.
What's the lesson, Mr. Sanyal? What is the lesson? What is the lesson for neighboring countries? What is the lesson for India? Because if you look at it on paper, it's a great idea, right? Liberalize the economy further. We've been asking for it. Allow imports to come in, make it an attractive place for destination, keep your currency strong. So they did all of that. And the outcome is quite a disaster. So what are the lessons here?
I think there are two sets of lessons. One is pure economics, and one is possibly a bit of political economy. So both are very important. On one hand, it very clearly shows that if you run populism beyond your means, what can happen in case of a country, particularly if you're a relatively smaller country and price taker in the global market, and in a lot of cases. Obviously, COVID and the tourism dependence has hit very badly. But at the same time, over a long period of time, the political economy problem, or the political problem that the country has faced, it's a great lesson for every, not only neighboring country, but possibly every policymaker, the importance of having a very stable political regime and some kind of a smooth system in any country. So that clearly establishes the importance of a stable political regime, helping the economic regime that kind of a narrative it's getting furthest. Otherwise, potential-wise, this particular country is pretty strong. But this is a clear demonstration how the civil wars and the political issues over the course of the last 2 decades has actually, or possibly even longer, has eventually culminated into this kind of a situation.
You know, it's an example. When the Sri Lankan civil war has been reported over decades, this is what happens over time when strife like this does not let a country reach its true potential. Mandana, I want to understand what you're tracking next in terms of where this story goes. We know the political pressure is building on the Rajapaksa government. Do you expect more developments on the political side? And what really needs to be done right now to ease the burden of the people of Sri Lanka?
Yes, politically, we are following how now tomorrow is Parliament. There will be Parliament sessions this week. So we're expecting the government to lose its majority. It held a 2/3 majority in Parliament for the past few votes, even on its budget. But the 2/3 first decline now, it seems as if given most of the coalition partners' decision to go independent and another group from the governing party also deciding to go independent in Parliament, most likely the government might lose its majority in Parliament. So that will be something to watch for, because at the end of the day, all that adds up to uncertainty, and that uncertainty is not going to help the Sri Lanka situation at the moment. It doesn't help at all when it comes to confidence building to investors, to businessmen, and even the stock market for that matter, which has been halting sessions for the past few days since last week. So because of that, I think the need of the hour is for everybody to get together, because this is something a single person cannot resolve. So therefore, I think there needs to be a joint effort, because if by any chance, if something happens to the country, we all as citizens and as a nation, we all tend to suffer. So as much as we need to focus on rebuilding our the structures and the systems, we now urgently need to come up with a joint plan somehow to get the country first out of this economic crisis we are in, and then eventually resolve and maybe put in the relevant checks and balances and the systems and the structures that would prevent a similar scenario from happening maybe in a few years down the line.
Right. Obviously, the immediate need is for aid to come in for neighbors, and India is also doing its bit, but across the world for the focus on resets, at least stabilizing the situation right now. Dr. Ahilan, let's talk solutions. Mandana talked about how the current government will lose its majority tomorrow. Obviously, the Rajapaksa brothers are extremely unpopular right now and could well be replaced soon. But will a new set of leaders change the problem and actually be the solution? Who are the people with the plan?
That is the really worrying moment, because there doesn't seem to be a plan even from the opposition to handle this crisis. There's a lot of, the Rajapaksa regime has been delegitimized. They are going to be under considerable pressure. But even if a new government was to emerge, what would they do at this current moment? If you look at the short term and the medium to long term, in the short term, we have to address the shortages of essentials. And I think the credit line from India, from other actors, to be able to import these essential items and to provide a little bit of liquidity is critical. But in the medium term, what we did not do the last 2 years have to be addressed. We really have to prioritize our imports. We cannot continue to live beyond our means. We cannot import luxuries and so on in this moment. So there has to be prioritization of our imports, and those essential items that are brought in have to be distributed through a public distribution system. If you allow it for private traders during this kind of a chaotic moment, there's going to be hoarding, there's going to be price hikes, and a lot of working people are going to be left high and dry. So there has to be a public distribution system, and the government has to make sure that at least the essentials like food and so on are given at controlled prices. But that can only be done if they reestablish the public distribution system, which was dismantled along with liberalization. Thirdly, where will the government get the revenue to be able to provide, control prices, to provide the kind of subsidies that are necessary, even as global commodity prices are going through the roof. Sri Lanka's revenues after the last tax cuts, even before that, it was on the order of maybe around 12 to 14% of GDP, abysmally low. But after the tax cuts by President Rajapaksa, it's now down to 8 or 9% of GDP. You can't run a country with that amount of revenue. At the same time, now as the economy is shrinking, it's very difficult to raise taxes as well. So there has to be innovative solutions. They probably have to consider a wealth tax, a property tax, so that the wealth that the wealthier classes have accumulated, the inequality has been rising drastically, have to be redistributed to be able to address, what working people are facing. Otherwise, they're going to face famine type of conditions, if not in the next few months, in the next year or two.
Oh dear. So a lot of tough decisions to be taken. A renewal of the PDS system, for example, is a very important suggestion that Dr. Ahilan makes. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today, Dr. Ahilan, Mandana. Thank you especially to both of you for joining us in the middle of such a distressing situation in your nation. We wish you all the very best, and all your countrymen and women. Thank you so much, Siddhartha Sanyal, for speaking with us today on this important topic. We hope Sri Lanka does bounce back, but an important lesson there. All of those policy announcements that you say, and for a lot of people, when government announces policy on what they're going to do next, it seems quite boring and you wonder, how is it relevant to my life? Well, here's how it's relevant, because if those policy announcements and those decisions go wrong again and again and again, you might suddenly find yourself in a deep hole scrambling to get out. We wish our neighbors all the very best.